Because you listen to this outstanding podcast, I'd like to invite you to check out another one that you may like as well. I'm Tom Rowland, host of Saltwater Experience television show and the Tom Rowland podcast. Each week, I drop 3 brand new shows, including interviews with extreme performers like the true giants of the fishing world, authors, athletes, Navy SEALs, and regular people with extraordinary stories to learn what took them to the top and how we can apply those same principles to our lives. How-to episodes are on Tuesday, and tune in for Physical Fridays to make sure you're on the path to catch a tarpon when you're 95 years old or be at your very best tomorrow. So search for the Tom Rowland Podcast where you listen, or go to tomrowlandpodcast.com and come on over.
There's a dumb one.
Yo.
Dude, yes.
There he is.
Oh, dude, that's a nice fish.
That's a nice fish.
This is the Amazing Outdoors Podcast. I am Brian Mays. This is episode number 47. Jordan Weeks is our guest. We have a muskie biologist as our guest today, and I want to get on with the program. I have a few updates. Here we go. I need to correct everybody on the Minnesota Sharp-tailed Grouse Society's website. It is www.sharptails.org. Number 1 today, Patreon. Join now at patreon.com/amazingoutdoors. It is $5. You can join for just 1 month. If you join quick, you can still scoop a hat, plus 1 entry per month to June's giveaway. Sport Dog, gear the way you'd design it. Check them out if you're in the market for a new dog collar system. From yard containment to multi-dog GPS, Sport Dog has something for you. I'm curious if the listeners would like me to have Clay Thompson of Sport Dog back on the show. He was super limited for time the day I had him on the program. Check out episode 37 and email me your thoughts on what Clay and I could cover if we were to have him back on the show. My email address is brian@amazen.com. That's brian@amazen.com. Number 4, Upland Outfitters. The discount code AMAZIN is still good for 20% off at uplndoutfitters.com. Check them out. The code AMAZIN is still good, but you could win a pair of these pants if you just join Patreon. There's only a few folks in right now. Why not get in early? And I understand everything's getting tight. Shit, my truck cost $157 to fill up the other day. I'm feeling it big time. However, I want to throw y'all a bone. Win one in a while would be nice, you know? If you're one of the next 5 or 6 people to join, I promise you're going to win, because the hat and the shipping each cost more than $5. You're going to spend $5 and you're going to get $10 plus worth of product back. I promise you that. Join, check it out, patreon.com/amazingoutdoors. Number 5, I wanted to highlight a couple episodes. If you like musky fishing, you should check out episode 20 and episode 33. Episode 20 is with Dan Donovan of Musky Fool. Episode 33 was recorded up at Treelands Resort, where we did the musky fly fishing tournament. I had Brian, the owner of River Rat USA, in. He's a Utah boy, and I wanted to show him how chasing muskies on the fly, how it was all done on his boat. He'd never been up here, so it's a really cool episode. It's not the most kid-friendly. We did have a few cocktails during that. Also consider checking out episode 45. I've been talking about the Minnesota Sharp-tailed Grouse Society. Again, they are hosting a spring fling double gun shoot. It's at Wings North, Pine City, Minnesota, April 30th. I will be there in support of the Minnesota Sharp-tailed Grouse Society. Come on out and raise some money for habitat and the amazing Sharpies of our truly unique brushland landscape. For more information, check out the show notes or visit www.sharptails.org. All right, we're almost done. Number 6, exclusive listener offer. If you want to come fish with me this year, again, my email address is brian@amaazen.com, brian@amazon.com. I will give you 25% off any public price you might find out there poking around on the internet, but you got to contact me and you got to email me directly for this offer. I fish Wisconsin and Minnesota. We float rivers from a raft and a drift boat, primarily chasing smallmouth and muskie on the fly. I also have added a few select days for chasing trout on dry flies in western Wisconsin. Email me for more information at brian@amazon.com. Lastly, listener engagement. Email me at, brian@amazon.com. I have absolutely enjoyed all of the emails from you listeners, and I thank you. And I especially thank Dennis for the feedback. Honestly, feedback's great. Most people, well, I don't want to say most people. Some people can't handle it. I always am interested in ways I can improve your listening experience. Who knows? You might even end up being a guest on the show. Well, that was a big... I tried but failed to keep it short. Maybe on the next show. I absolutely have muskie on my brain. It is thawing. Season doesn't open yet for too long, but I wanted to get on one of the experts on muskie. Here is today's show, episode 47. Today I have Jordan Weeks of the Wisconsin DNR. He is a muskie nut, just like me. So Jordan, welcome to the Amazing Outdoors podcast, man, and I'm excited for today's topic.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. I appreciate you having me on.
What's your background and how did you get to your current position with the DNR, Jordan? So can you fill us in on a little bit of your passions and then how you're working with muskies every day?
Yeah, sure, no problem. It kind of dates back to when I was a youth, probably an early teenager, and at that time it was kind of the birth of this, Bassmasters thing where they had the race car boats and kind of being televised and kind of becoming more mainstream. And I was really into that. I would sit in the living room and organize my tackle. And at that time, I was living in southern Wisconsin, and the only opportunities for muskies were in the Madison chain, and those were hybrid tiger muskies. So there were stocked fish that were put in there to create a fishery. And I found out about those fish just by messing around. I actually had a really cool summer school class that it was called like Scientific Analysis of the Outdoor World or something like that. And
was this in high school?
Yeah, but it really was just fishing. Like all we did every day was go fishing in a different place. It was our science teacher who took us, Mr. Dolk. I'll never forget him because he took me fishing every day. It was awesome.
You can't beat that man in high school.
Yeah, right. And so, you didn't mind going to summer school when you were doing that kind of thing. But he'd take us, most of it was for panfish or, at a lock. It was all on shore, so it wasn't like out in boats or anything, but it would still give you kind of a feel for fishing different places. My dad was a fisherman, but he never really had a lot of passion to go. And I think part of it was because my brother and I were small and we maybe weren't very fun to be with in the boat. But as we got older, we kind of pushed my father to do a little more fishing, and he ended up buying a boat, and we were able to kind of expand that. And he was from north central Wisconsin and Eau Claire, Chippewa Falls, Eau Claire area, and we would go up there to visit his parents, and we started fishing. And because I was the bass kid at the time, fishing with a lot of bass lures, spinner baits, and whatnot, and we ended up running into muskies. And I'm going to say it was when I was 16. I don't remember exactly when I was afflicted with this muskie disease, but it was somewhere right around my 16th birthday. And I caught one.
I love that you referenced it as a disease, though.
Yeah, well, I mean, if you do it, But
my wife thinks I'm just mentally ill, so it's okay.
Well, my wife actually fishes with me now, so.
Well, mine does too, but she still thinks I'm sick.
Well, yeah, I don't know. I guess I haven't asked my wife that question, but I probably would get the same answer. So anyway, it was all over after that. I caught one, and I'm like, wow, these fish are toothy and charismatic and fun to catch. And so I kind of forsaken all other fishes at that point, and just concentrated on muskies. Now I sucked at that time, and the equipment was really crappy at that time, but it got me into this mindset of trying to like work with fish. I didn't really know what I want to do. I mean, who does at 16 years old? And I actually
Hell,
in
I
that same
barely
height.
did by the time I was 30.
Well, to each their own, right? But when I was in high school, there was an ag class, and one day I walked by this ag class. It was like in the back of the school where the tech ed stuff was, and I wasn't really into any of that. I don't even know why I was back in the hallway, but I looked into this classroom, and there was a fish tank in there, and I saw some bluegill swimming around the tank, and I peeked my head in the door to ask the teacher. I said, "Hey, what's up with the bluegill tank?" He's like, "Oh, this is for our class," and I'm like, "Oh, what class is that?" And he said, "It's like ag, something," and it didn't have anything, it didn't have fish in the title. So I was like, "Oh, okay, well, this is not for me." I wasn't going to be a farmer or anything like that. So I said, "Well, why do you have fish then if it's ag?" He's like, "Well, aquaculture is kind of like agriculture, and really this class is about the natural environment. It's kind of like a pseudoscience course." And he kind of outlined what they did in the course, and part of it was like measuring how these fish grew during the year. And I'm like, "Well, this is totally for me." So it was as a junior I actually took that course, and I really realized like, hey, this is something I'm interested in. On top of that, growing up down in southern Wisconsin, I could never figure out, like, because I was watching these Bassmaster guys. You kind of have to remember that. I was watching these guys. They're fishing all year round. They're catching bass all over the place. And in Wisconsin, we're like, well, the Department of Natural Resources was telling us you can't fish for bass until the first Saturday in May. And I just had a tough time trying to figure out why that would be. And I even made a couple calls to the DNR office at the time. I was like, high school kid or whatever, asking questions. And, I guess the answers I got, I just didn't really feel fulfilled with. And so it was kind of during that time I formulated this, like, I want to try to figure out how I can influence some of these decisions. And that was really the start of my fisheries career, even though I didn't know it at the time. And the whole time, like my spare time was split between fishing and sports. I played 3 sports in high school, and the rest of my time was in a boat or on the edge of the water, chunking for fish.
So are you one of these nuts that went completely into fishing and doesn't hunt at all?
Oh no,
Okay.
I'm a
Well,
hunter as well.
I've met plenty of them that can't, and they're better men than I am because they've been able to constrict their life to one hobby, and I can't.
Yeah, I don't either. I'm a deer hunter. I actually started out. I remember the days of waiting for my dad to call us during the 9-day gun season to find out if he had shot a deer or whatever.
Sure.
So I started out being a purely gun hunter for the 9-day season, and most often it wasn't even 9 days. Like most people in Wisconsin only hunt a couple days. But I started out doing that, and all the way through through college. So I don't know how old I was, 22, I suppose. Um, I just didn't have the time to. My brother would bow hunt, and he told me how fun it was, and I just was like, yeah, whatever, bro, and kind of did my own thing in college. And
There's
when
muskies on the river right now, and it's the fall.
right, and that was it. It's like, wow, I was in Stevens Point. The Wisconsin River is full of muskies. The fall was fantastic. You can catch fish just from shore below the dams or whatever. So it's like, why am I going to go sit in a tree when I can go out here and catch muskies? And then when I left school and kind of had more, I don't know, I felt like I had more time. I started bow hunting, and I realized how much I like that intimate experience. And so in sitting in those trees and waiting for the deer to come, and act like deer instead of my interpretation during the gun season, which is they're not acting like deer, they're acting like they're terrified and they're running 100 miles an hour. I got to watch what deer do, and then I kind of really understood what hunting was about. And so in that respect, I was late to the game, I think, and
Yeah, but you had the acumen already just because you musky fish. I'm sorry, musky fishing is so much like hunting.
right, and that's the point I was just going to make is like I figured out how this stealth tactics and kind of patterning the deer was very similar to the musky fishing experience, and so it was a really easy jump for me to just and I basically don't gun hunt anymore. You can have your 9-day season, you can have your Orange Army, you can have your blasting at them from 400 yards. That's not for me. I don't care if anybody else does it. Like, that doesn't bother me. I'm a big to each their own type of guy. But
Same.
I just choose not to do it. And the other hunting passion I have is for turkeys. I started turkey hunting very soon after we could begin. Let's see. So zone 4 now is up by the Eau Claire area. So the first year, I don't remember what year it was, but maybe 2000, 2001 was the
Somewhere
first
around
year
there.
they could start. And I started hunting up there at that time because that's where my parents were living at the time. And I've been hunting turkeys ever since. And it didn't take me very long to transition from a gun turkey hunter to a archery turkey hunter. So I don't
Oh,
know.
really?
Yeah, I killed about 10 birds with a shotgun. And I'm not, I guess sometimes I say it's easy because it can be, but I just wanted another challenge.
Yep.
And so I started just specifically targeting them with my archery equipment. And I don't
back
have
your
anything
bow.
against guns. I don't have anything against people who want to, shoot them with the gun. I just think it's a lot easier. So I choose to do it the hard way. And
Do you back your bow down for turkey hunting?
I back it down for deer too. I
Do
have
you?
70-pound limbs, and usually if you tune it up right, it's about 73 pounds when you torque them down.
Sure.
But I usually run mine about 62 pounds, no matter what I'm doing. I found that the broadhead is more important than the draw weight.
Oh,
I'm
yeah.
shooting turkeys with a bow.
Especially with some of the newer technology with the bows and how fast they shoot today.
Yeah.
I've had some issues with my bow cranked all the way up with just all kinds of different stuff. I set mine up for elk hunting a few years ago, and I was going to take it out turkey hunting the next year, and I'm like, this just isn't going to work. And because I've got a heck of a lot of weight up front. I've got inserts in my front end of my arrows.
Mm-hmm.
So I dusted off one of my old bows and cranked that bad boy all the way down to like 40 some pounds and started shooting it. And I might take it out this spring. I can draw it back, no problem. Like if I had to stop halfway through, I could stop. And that's why I drew it back or I cranked it down, because I just don't think you need it to kill a turkey. You don't need the oomph. You got to be able to get there, but you don't need the oomph really if you're putting a good shot on a bird. But yeah, I've never done it. I've never killed one with a bow, and I've always told myself every season I was going to grab the bow, but then the season comes around and I grab the shotgun. So it's one of those things where if I had both my properties a little bit more groomed, I would probably feel a little bit more comfortable with the bow. But my run and gun style and not really, I don't like sitting in tents, which makes it a little difficult for bow hunting. Have you ever shot one just run and gun style with the bow?
Well, that's the next box to check off. I got somewhere around 20 with the bows so far, between spring and fall turkeys, and I mean, I have a really good place to hunt, so that helps, right? But
it totally helps with turkeys, man.
Yeah, the other thing I would say on your point about draw weight and whatnot is I'd rather have an arrow go halfway through and stick in that bird, than one that zips through at 100 miles an hour and the arrow goes through and then the turkey runs away or flies away. The kill zone on a turkey is really small, and so to hit it with a broadhead or hit it with an arrow is difficult, at best.
Have you ever tried any of those like guillotine style broadheads?
I did.
Any success?
Well, no. I got really interesting video. I videotape pretty much everything I do outside. So all my deer hunting, I videotape, self-film, and all my fishing, I self-film.
Do you?
I actually have a YouTube channel called Biological Angler Productions, and it's getting a
we'll
little
put it
bit
in
more
the show notes, man.
Yeah, it's a little bit more, getting a little bit of popularity. I kind of do it for fun. I'm not trying to do it for business. I'm just trying to help people kind of like what I do in my job to make fishing better, for lack of a better term. But the hunting thing with those head loppers. So my first shot, you have to basically have a different arrow setup, right? And if you read the directions on the back of those guillotine type broadheads, they say they recommend 5-inch feathers And if you don't have those, what happens is that guillotine head steers your arrow all over the place. So
that's what I always thought, you know, and
yeah.
I thought when I think about like guys that take an old traditional recurve bow and they go out and they shoot birds with it, like pheasants.
Yeah.
You see these big honking arrows that they have, or the fletchings that they have on
the
their arrows.
flus. Yep.
And that's when I saw them, I'm like, I'm pretty certain I'm going to need a different setup for that. And I didn't even read the directions. I just passed on, went over to my good old Muzzies and Thunderhead area.
Yeah, and so I had 2 of them, I think, and I had a bird at 15 yards, and I'm trying to lop its head off, and the first arrow hit in front of the bird, so it missed by over 2 feet on the ground, and the bird didn't have any idea. So I
at
got
15
another arrow.
yards.
Yeah, I mean, it just did a right turn and just went right to the ground, and so I got another arrow and missed again, and the bird was still hanging around. So the third arrow was a regular broadhead, and I ended up killing it. And that was actually my first turkey with a bow.
No shit.
Yeah. So I was like, that was my bad
third
experience.
shot, huh?
That's the cool thing about archery turkeys is, you know, I always tell everybody, if you're going to start doing it, carry a big quiver because you're going to get more than one shot.
Really?
If you don't hit them, yeah. If you don't hit them or if you graze them, because a lot of times they're coming in ready to fight.
Oh, sure. They
don't
got
know.
one track. They got one track mind, man, and they don't care. Usually.
Yeah, their little tiny pea brain is just like, hey, I'm trying to fight this decoy, or I'm trying to, you know, make myself look nice to this decoy, and they're not really paying attention to stuff that hits them. And unless you get a piece of them, like if you get a leg or if you get, you know, a wing or something like that, then they don't stick around as much. But more often than not, you're going to get multiple shots.
That's crazy.
The first one might be I always set my decoys close, so the first shot's real close, like 15 yards. And then most often the second shot might be 30 to 35, maybe 40. But they'll be there for you to shoot at again, almost guaranteed.
I can see that. I mean, especially after hunting turkeys as long as I have, I've had many times where we had a bachelor group come in, want to beat the snot out of I've got a mounted Jake decoy.
Uh-huh.
Don't look too mounted anymore because it's been like 15 seasons, but it still pulls them across the field without calling. So,
yeah,
something about the iridescence and the feathers and that tail fan just bouncing that makes them freaking go nuts. But, yeah, we've had many encounters where we've had multiple birds come in and, you know, somebody shoots one with a shotgun and they still hang around and want to beat up that bird on the ground. So I can see it. But it's just so crazy because I know for me, and I'm sure some of the listeners right now, they have all turkey hunted where they've literally scratched their nose in the woods and that turkey runs off. So I know what you're saying. I can picture it and I've seen it, but it's still like one of those things where, man, it'd sure be nice to be able to get a second shot on a bird. You know, I've had instances where I've missed, not 100% always accurate. And man, it'd be a hell of a lot more. It'd be a hell of a lot more fun if I would have been able to bag that bird with a second shot with an arrow. So that's interesting. Sure. I've never done it, but yeah, we'll have to stay in touch, man. You tend to fall into all kind of three of my big passions outside of bird hunting. You know, deer hunting, turkey hunting, and musky fishing, smallmouth bass fishing are kind of my favorite things. I'll do a bunch of other things, but they're my favorites.
Yeah, if I had to choose, it would be tough. It would really be tough, especially I think I'd probably it'd be between musky fishing and turkey hunting. And if you made me choose a second fish to go after, it might just be flathead catfish. But smallmouth would be the third for sure.
Some of the catfishing down on the river by you is phenomenal, and I know a couple of friends of mine who have gotten into it over the last years, and they catch some big fish.
Yeah, there's something about anything that's like 60 pounds that swims around and eats other fish. That's pretty cool.
That is pretty damn cool. Well, let's dive into muskies if you don't mind.
Sure.
So you are one of the Wisconsin state DNR folks that manages and influences the musky fishery.
Yeah, I think that'd be a fair assessment.
Fair assessment. Okay. Can you give us a little bit of maybe the history? I know there's a ton of lore around Muskie, but let's talk about a little bit of the history, because much like a lot of other animals and critters that were on the landscape prior to Wisconsin's big cutover, I imagine muskies were prevalent and then went through a decline period. So can you maybe fill us up into a little bit of the history, and then maybe bring us up to when you guys kind of started stocking muskie and tiger muskie in the fishery, and try to maybe make 5 minutes out of a little bit of the history here?
Wow, this is actually one of the questions I don't think I've ever been asked, and I'm not sure I have the best answer for you, but I'll do what I can.
I told you I was going to try to stump you, man.
Yeah, I think you got me right out the door. But
well, and I want to build up to a little bit more of like the muskie's habit, and I think, excuse me, I think the listeners would be a little interested in some of the history, and take it for whatever you can explain us.
Sure, so like way back, I don't know, 100 years ago, most of our muskie resources were associated with big rivers. The Chippewa River and its tributaries, the Wisconsin River and its tributaries. That's the main home range, original muskie range in Wisconsin. Now, there may have been a few connected lakes that had fish in it, but for the most part, they're a riverine beast in Wisconsin.
Well, and that's what I was really trying to get out of you, because from what I understood, and again, I'm just a layman here with a microphone that loves to fish and hunt. They were originally more of a river fish.
Yeah, pretty much everywhere they exist, it's they're.
And I don't think a lot
rivers.
of anglers look at it that way, because you guys have done a great job putting fish in all kinds of lakes and expanding this fishery. But back 100 years ago, it was primarily river where these fish were harvested or caught. They weren't in the Madison chain of lakes. It's kind of my point.
Right. Yeah. Southern Wisconsin didn't really have any native musky water unless you considered like the lower part of the Wisconsin River. And those fish would have just been ones that emigrated downstream, because before people made all the dams and stuff on these big rivers, there were impassable barriers in the form of waterfalls and whatnot, that once a fish went down, they're not getting back up to where they were born. So there were fish throughout these river systems, and there's even record of a muskie in the Mississippi down by La Crosse in like 1950-ish, somewhere around there. But for the most part, they were associated with river systems. And as we dammed them up, we created reservoirs, and they did really well in those situations. And, that's kind of back in the day when all these world record or alleged world record, depending on who you want to believe.
Cal Johnson, Louis Spray,
Yeah,
that whole lore of the Wisconsin muskie.
Yeah, whenever those were caught, I wasn't there. I'm only 46, so I was not around.
I'm only
for any
37, so I predate you, or you predate me, and yeah, I'm still. I've seen the mounts and stuff, and I still have to scratch my head at how many funny games were going on back then, but we'll leave it at that. That's why it's lore and nostalgic for Wisconsin.
Yeah, I mean, it is what it is. Like I said, I wasn't there. I don't know what happened. I'm not going to call anybody a liar. But I don't really care either way. I mean, for me, I recognize how big muskies can get, and from a scientific perspective, and I think it's fairly easy to figure out where the largest muskies in the world live if you really want to look into it. And that stuff is just not something I'm ever worried about, and not really something that the Department of Natural Resources is that worried about either. In my opinion on that subject, and I think that it's kind of important, it might be interesting to some of your listeners, is that I almost think we should have like decadal records, or some sort of modern day record system where we still acknowledge these past records for whatever they are, and also kind of create this buzz over the potential of getting like a modern day, let's say, angling record, because the fisheries have changed tremendously. Like we talked about before, most of the time they were associated with these big rivers. As they got dammed up, they kind of expanded their range, and then there's all kinds of stories about moving fish around via rail car, stocking them out of, those big milk cans, and that's kind of how we started out with stocking in Wisconsin. And then eventually we had actual propagation programs that the DNR was involved with to grow fish in places like Woodruff and Spooner and some smaller hatcheries around the way. And eventually we get to where we are today, with is like, just shy of 700 musky lakes and 100 river segments, and tons of opportunity for musky fishing in Wisconsin.
That there is. There is no shy of musky, or there's no shortage of musky water in Wisconsin. And it's gotten better. I caught my first muskie, 9th cast, 9 years old, 3 Lakes, Wisconsin. And I hate to even admit this live on air, man, but my old man was not the kind of angler I am. And I grew up in a family where we pretty much kept everything we caught. And it was the only muskie in my lifetime I've ever eaten. But my old man kept it, and he didn't put it on the wall.
Yeah, I don't think you should feel bad for that, man.
Well, it's more because of all the crap that is going to come my way, probably from the keyboard warrior style anglers out there in the muskie community. But I don't care. I remember how it tasted. It was damn good.
Yeah, they do. They kind of have in my opinion, like a sweet flesh.
Yes.
It's interesting. I've had them. I haven't harvested any myself, but I've had them die on me. And so what's the difference, right? If you're, on that note, if you're a muskie angler and you catch 100 muskies, 5 of them are dead. Whether you are the best releaser or not, or whether you have the best equipment or not, the minimum is going to be 5, because that's hooking mortality. There's been a bunch of research that shows it's somewhere right around 5%. I had a fish that I caught on Lake of the Woods in Ontario with a size limit of 54 inches. I caught a 47-incher that was as big around as a railroad tie. I caught it on a single hook spinnerbait in the corner of the mouth, and by the time I tried to let that thing go, it was deader than a doornail. And I have no idea why. And, I've told that story a bunch of times. It was a magnificent fish. I have no clue why it died, but the fact of the matter is if you're successful at all at this sport, you're going to kill some. So I don't think you should cast disparagement upon anyone else who chooses to legally harvest one, which happens very rarely, or inadvertently, kills one. Just pursuing
and I agree. I actually was going to kind of ask you this question, and you kind of led me into it. That's that instance where you got a under legal size fish and it dies. Like, what is the best practice for, like, what did you do? Did you contact Fish and Game and let them know? Like, what is an angler supposed to do in that scenario where I've yet to have it happen to me, where and I'm sure I've killed them. They swam away on me. But I've never had a undersized slot fish die on me and have to deal with that scenario. And I think the average angler would kind of probably more or less just slide it down the river, I think. So what's the legal best practice for a scenario like that where you kill an undersized fish by accident?
Well, I agree with you. I think most often people just, because they're not prepared for that situation, they don't expect it to happen and they don't want it to happen.
Yeah.
Right? And I want to make that clear. Like, I'm not accusing musky anglers of trying to kill fish, and none of us are trying to do it, right? But
it just happens,
right?
Yeah.
So for me, what my choice was, I was in the middle of Whitefish Bay in Lake of the Woods, which is, I don't know, it's big. And there's no cell signal there. And that was actually before we had good cell phones, to be honest with you. So I didn't have any contact information there. My only choice was to take this fish. I went over to the shore and I found some bulrush that was real, like, stiff. And I put that fish upright, hoping that it would, survive. I know that it didn't, because there was an eagle feasting the next day over there. So I know that it didn't survive. But had I known what I know now, like, I have the contact information for the Kenora Ministry of Natural Resources. I actually now know who the biologist is for Lake of the Woods. So if that happened to me today, I can get on my phone as soon as I get back to the resort or get cell signal and call them and say, hey, I got this fish. Do you guys want it? Because as scientists, we don't usually get muskies structures so we can use for aging or genetics or any number of scientific discovery, we don't get them very often because very few are, like in the hundreds, low hundreds, are harvested every year, and most of the people kind of don't want the notoriety of harvesting muskies, so they just take them home and eat them, right? So it's kind of like what you're talking about. They don't want to, they don't want to be shunned by the community or anybody.
Which is horrible, man. And
right.
I just have to say it. And
we all got to do better, man. We just to each their own.
Right? We got to be better to each other.
Right.
That's the bottom line, man. And it's just sad that I've seen it too often where you get some younger angler or some novice that doesn't know much comes into a muskie forum, posts this picture, and they just lambast him. Right. And it's just like, I mean, you're not holding the fish right, or I mean, come on, dude. Like, seriously, the guy caught a muskie. He's coming here because he didn't know what to do. Help him out.
Right.
Educate him. Don't make him feel like an idiot.
I agree.
It just drives me nuts. But anyways, I digress.
Yeah. So, if you have a little forethought, if like, for example, if you fish in a certain county in Wisconsin, like if you got a cabin on the Chippewa flowage, it would pay for you to get the contact information of the conservation warden in the area and the fisheries biologist, who would be Max Walter. I don't know who the warden is in the area, and there might be a couple. But, you could, if you had that fish, in your net over the side of the boat and you knew it was dead, Max probably can't give you permission as the biologist. He can't tell you can, bring that fish in. But a game warden could. A game warden could say, okay, well, I know your intention wasn't to keep this. Well, you can't have the fish, but Max can use it for science. And then we could get that fish. Like, the bigger the fish is, the more important it is. We do have a lot of information on our smaller, younger fish in Wisconsin because we can get accurate ages on those fish from other structures that you don't have to kill the fish for. But when you have older, larger fish in the state of Wisconsin, the only accurate way to get their age and therefore determine what their growth is to get a structure out of their head, which is called a clythra. It's in their you have to kill them. So
is it in their like ear canal kind of?
That's the otolith.
Okay.
But those aren't as good for muskies, but you can age them by an otolith. It's kind of like a rock in their head. If you catch a sheep head and cut their head open, cheek. They're really big. Yeah. They're a little higher than that, like behind the eyes. But the clythra is kind of in the gill area, and it's kind of an L-shaped bone that we clean up, and you can see the growth rings on it really, really well, and it's a very accurate way to age muskies. And for a fish that lives, over 20 years, maybe up to 30, 35 years on occasion, it's important to know how old those largest individuals are. It really helps us manage the fishery better. If we know that, it takes a fish 35 years to get to 45 inches and it's a female, we might be able to help, speed that growth up by doing management actions. So that information is very valuable, especially on the older, larger fish. But it just takes a little bit of forethought to figure out who the people are to contact. The game warden is the answer. Like, the law enforcement folks are the people to contact because they're the ones that can authorize you to retain that fish or bring it into the DNR so we can do something with it.
Well, that's I think it's really enlightening, and I'm glad you shared that with us today, Jordan, because it's what I personally would have done. I mean, I would have called the warden because the warden's the one that's going to be able to make that decision. But I didn't know that there would be an interest in potentially taking that fish for research. And I think that's really important for people to understand because I think a lot of people would be concerned contacting the warden that they were going to get ticketed. And then on top of that, I think there's a little bit of concern because they just don't understand what's going to go on with the fish. I got a fish that's illegal. I'm going to get ticketed for it. I think if people understood that, okay, I got a fish that's illegal. I killed it. It was an accident. I'm going to call the warden and let them know that I have this fish and the fish is probably going to go to research. I think a lot more people would be apt to call. Bottom line.
The bottom line is if you're not doing anything wrong, you're not getting a ticket. Like, our wardens don't go around looking for stuff. Like, if you're doing something illegal, there's a pretty good chance you're going to get a ticket. If you're not, and you're not a jerk, being a jerk is another good way to get a ticket. But
absolutely,
if you're not done that, and I agree with that concept. Like, if you're a jerk, you should get a ticket. But If you're not, and you're honestly doing what your best, maybe that warden will say, you know what, I can't make it there. You're gonna just have to let that fish go. Then you have to do it. Like that's what you're being told. Like in that situation, unfortunately, the turtles get to eat it, or the crayfish, or whatever. It goes back to nature. But
They
yeah,
do
I
all
mean,
have to eat at some point too,
yeah. So
it-
the thing that everyone needs to remember is the death of one individual does not negatively affect the population, even if it's giant fish. So we're not in the situation in Wisconsin, in almost every one of our lakes. We're not in the situation where the death of one fish means the demise of that population. That just is not a thing. So I'm not advocating for harvest. Certainly, when people were harvesting muskies religiously and eating, using them for food, that was a different time. We don't need to do that anymore, and muskies shouldn't be harvested as a food fish for a number of different reasons, contaminants being one of them. But if one dies and it's of legal size, and you should take it home and utilize it rather than throw it to the bottom, because there's nothing wrong with eating one or having a dead one. You just have to realize that it's probably not going to be looked well upon by other musky anglers in particular, but it is what it is, right?
but we're a different breed, and then there's a whole couple different segments of different breeds of musky folk, and I just think that lends itself to a whole lot of egos.
Yeah, I think that's a prerequisite for musky fishing. Your ego has to be bigger than your boat or something like that. I think that's a rule.
Well, I think this is a great opportunity, really quick, Jordan, to take a quick break, and then let's come back, and I'd like to dive into a little bit of the biology and habits of these fish throughout the fishing season. So hold on one second here. All right, man. So we talked a little bit of the history. I'd love to have you back for a specific topic, and maybe the listeners, if they're interested, could email me at brian@amazon.com. But I'd love to talk specifically at another time about tiger muskies and kind of that whole dynamic with the introduction of them. But let's just talk about muskellunge in general for the time being here. You and I both have some hard stops coming up, and I want to get to this particular conversation. So being a river fish, historically, genetically, I guess you could say, they have I'm assuming, a propensity to migrate for spawning in the springtime. I'm assuming that's correct.
Yeah, that's been shown by a number of different published research studies, including my master's work. Yep.
Yeah, and I'm just trying to kind of get the conversation to the point where I want to ask this question, or I kind of turn it over to you. So they migrate, which means they're going to be somewhere in the spring, and then summer, and then that fall timeframe. In a river system, they could be in different locations. So could you maybe take us through just the fishing season, from opening date to, I don't want to say closing date, because I think that's the end of December, and I don't know, most of our musky water is unfishable at that point for me. I know there's guys that do it, but for me, I'm out. Could you kind of maybe like that, right when I guess maybe cut it off when some of the lakes start icing up, because that's when I know a lot of guys are still musky fishing on the rivers. But I think most people are interested from like opening date through kind of like end of September, maybe, is most people's fishing season that they would kind of pursue muskies, maybe into October, November if they're a true nut. So where do these fish hang throughout the year, and where could an angler maybe expect to find them in rivers or in lakes, but from different times of the year?
Sure. So some of it is season and water temperature related, and that goes into the spawning time, right? So most often in northern Wisconsin, probably not allowed to fish for muskies when they're spawning. I say that separately from whether or not it matters. But most of the time, conditions exist so that you're not. So what has happened just prior to when we're allowed to fish for them in the northern about third of the state, they've gone through their spawning ritual, which includes typically running upstream in these river systems. If it's associated with a reservoir, they'll run out of the reservoir up the rivers or streams or creeks to do their spawning event. And most often what happens is their spawning temperature is roughly 45-ish degrees, and
It's that low, huh?
yeah,
I'm
up to
surprised by that.
55. There's a range, right? It's a bell-shaped curve, 45 to 55.
Yep. But it's
You
a
know,
little lower than I would have anticipated.
yeah, I think some of the literature says like 50 or 55. But from my experience, we catch more of them in our surveys just before that time than as it gets a little bit warmer. And so that's why I use that number. It's also just kind of to prove a point. Like what they like to follow these massive movements of other fish species like
Like the
walleyes
suckers
and white suckers.
Yeah.
And so oftentimes what happens is they'll be right behind those red suckers up these tributaries, eating them the whole way. White sucker and red horse, they spawn just before muskies, and the muskies will be right after them going up here, and they'll snack on them the whole way up, and then they do their thing. And typically, in most of our river systems, they'll find an area of just a little bit of slack water, maybe has some vegetation in it. Most often the bottom is relatively firm. And in order to be successful, there has to be oxygenated substrate. So the bottom has to have oxygen. If it's too mucky or pussy or gross, there won't be any oxygen, and then those eggs would suffocate and not hatch. So they need areas with not full current. They need a little bit of slack water, but they do need circulation so those eggs then hatch. And depending on water temperature, if you got a steadily increasing water temperature, they hatch, in about 7 to 14 days, and then those fry kind of float downstream, right? But after the muskies, the adults get done actually trying to make babies, then they'll again munch on those red horse and white sucker and anything else that happens to be in the river. And as water temperatures warm, maybe into June, then some of the fish actually slip back downstream to either the reservoir they came from or some of the bigger holes. They tend to spend time in every part of these rivers, though, because as an angler, I know that when I find one in a riffle, I'm going to find a bunch in riffles. And when I find them in a run, I'll find a bunch in runs. And when I find a bunch in the holes, I'll find most of the fish in the holes. I generally don't catch, when I'm fishing anyway, fish all over the place. They all tend to be playing the same game. Or maybe it's that once I catch one, I concentrate on those areas a little bit more, which could be possible too.
I tend to find that a little bit though too. I mean, I fish a lot on the St. Croix, so we have a lot of that riffle run pool stuff that we fish, and it seems like when they're in that faster water, they're in the faster water. Right. When we're in the slack water, or they're being lazy, they're lazy. It's usually pretty consistent, I find as well.
Yep, and in general, a general kind of progression is that they go from faster, skinnier water earlier in the year to slower, deeper water later in the fall. And we know that they overwinter in these areas. They don't like a lot of current in the wintertime. In any given river, they're going to find the deepest, slowest water they can find, and that's where most of them are going to be. It's a function of two things. It's a function of, first, that's the easiest place for them to survive through the winter. And second, those are the same places that those same red horse and sucker are hanging out in that same time period. So it's a function of muskies doing only two things in life, and one of them is making more muskies. And once they're done doing that, the only thing they have to do is eat. So it's a function of following the bait fish to where they're going in the late fall, and also the area that allows them to conserve the most energy. Because not everybody understands that once they get done spawning, the females actually start creating their gametes for the following year almost immediately.
Really?
So they're taking in energy, and portion of it goes towards growth, and a portion of it goes towards egg production throughout the rest of the year. And so that's part of the reason that once females get old and large, they grow at a slower rate per year, like
sure,
fewer inches per year, because they have to put so much energy towards this big mass of eggs that they just drop on the bottom of the river every year. They don't get to utilize that energy. So they'll actually, late in the fall, you'll see these, a lot of people talk about, putting on the feed bag, getting ready for winter, but not exactly how it works, because they have to feed throughout the winter to maintain life. And so, yeah, they do tend to appear as if they feed a lot in the fall, and that's probably associated with both those things. That they do like the cooler temperatures. They're happy. There's plentiful food in those areas, and then also they're trying to create and finish up this egg production as it gets into winter.
Makes a lot of sense. I will say that can correlate a lot of my muskie catches with suckers in the river. It's one of the things when I go out fishing, I'm constantly looking in the water for, those little schools of suckers and things along those lines. And pretty much every time I see the suckers, we'll have a contact. And if I had a couple floats this fall, it was kind of a weird fall for me, but no suckers, no fish. It's just the way it kind of rolled, at least up by me, the last few weeks of the season. So, just a little observation.
Yeah, there's been a ton of research done on muskie and diet, and every one of them comes back with white sucker being at the top of the list. The only game fish that even gets an honorable mention are yellow perch and perhaps northern pike. Otherwise, it's like, they eat white suckers when they can. If they have a choice, they'll go after white sucker. And the reason really for that is they don't have any spines, and they're the perfect size to feed a charismatic megafauna like a muskie.
So you mentioned perch. And I think as growing up as a kid, booker tails and these big, booker, Joe Booker kind of big Rapala kind of baits. I'm kind of losing my
Depth raider.
That's the one I was looking for. Perch color was the first one we'd grab all the time. That and a black and orange. Black and orange is just kind of my color. But what is the deal with perch and muskies? Do they really like them, or is it more just that there's an abundance of perch in some systems that, they're, again, the right size, easy target, that kind of deal?
It's probably both. It's probably, prevalence or abundance of perch. It's also their easy meal for muskies. It just seems like in every diet study that's been done, perch show up as a second. They're not their primary forage, but if they're available, especially in really large numbers, which tends to happen in perch. So when you think about the biology of perch, right, they have these boom bust cycles where they'll have really good natural production. They'll be everywhere. And then for maybe a year or two, they will be much lower and you won't have them. And, very similar to crappies. Some other species are more consistent when it comes to reproduction, but perch are a little bit boom and bust depending on which system you're in and the conditions. But yeah, I mean, if they're the most prevalent thing, that's what the muskie's going to eat. Like, a muskie is an opportunist. So, the conflict always comes from the walleye guy who's got one on the end of their jig and it's, struggling from the bottom to the surface. And there happens to be a muskie there that's hungry. And, well, no kidding, that muskie's going to eat that struggling, presumably dying fish because it's an easy target. But wherever we look to try to find walleye in muskie diets, we're very bad at doing that because they just don't tend to chase them down and eat them. Whereas they do seem to select for white sucker at almost every turn.
Because you listen to this outstanding podcast, I'd like to invite you to check out another one that you may like as well. I'm Tom Rowland, host of Saltwater Experience television show and the Tom Rowland podcast. Each week, I drop 3 brand new shows, including interviews with extreme performers like the true giants of the fishing world, authors, athletes, Navy SEALs, and regular people with extraordinary stories to learn what took them to the top and how we can apply those same principles to our lives. How-to episodes are on Tuesday, and tune in for Physical Fridays to make sure you're on the path to catch a tarpon when you're 95 years old or be at your very best tomorrow. So search for the Tom Rowland Podcast where you listen, or go to tomrowlandpodcast.com and come on over.
So moving forward a little bit, is there any big changes, or has there been any big changes that have affected the muskie fishery in the last 5-10 years that are worth talking about here today?
Oh, wow. Yeah, I mean, these might be my personal, opinions on some of this stuff. But like in Wisconsin, the catch and release ethic, kind of catching on, perpetuated mostly by Muskie's Inc., was a game changer. I have a friend of mine who is a northern Wisconsin guide, and now he's an editor of Muskie magazine. He was a guide for many years, full time guide, and he told me he knew that this catch and release thing was going to work out back in like the early 90s when because that was the time the last time anyone asked him to keep a muskie in his boat. And then by 1996, he said I just didn't allow anybody to, and it didn't matter. Before that, it was like people still had this idea of catching and eating them. But after that time, he's just like, yeah, I didn't even let them, and I had just as many clients as I ever did. So, to me, the mid 90s were kind of the turning point for that, where 99.9% of all muskies caught in the state of Wisconsin and anywhere in their range really are released. Regulations come into play, but in my mind, because of catch and release, it doesn't necessarily matter what regulations are, and regulations are only for the non-muskie anglers because muskie anglers don't keep fish. Another really significant thing that happened in Wisconsin, at least in my career, was the adoption of the abolishment of single hook sucker rigs. So in 2012, the department enacted a rule that said you were no longer able to use these big square hooks that folks would put in the nose of a sucker. And then the concept was at the time, you'd basically, put these suckers out. Most of the time people used them in the fall, but they used them all year with just one single hook in. And when a muskie grabbed the sucker, you would give it, like a half an hour. And in that half an hour, the muskie would kill the sucker, turn it, and swallow it head first, because that's how they feed. And then the angler would just reel that fish in. He wouldn't really set the hook because they weren't necessarily hooked, yet this giant 10-aught square hook was in the stomach, excuse me, stomach of a muskie that you're trying to reel in while it struggled to get away. And you hope to get that thing in the net before it puked up your sucker. And this was a common practice especially in the fall, and especially in a lot of our big flowages. Like, people would go put out, a bunch of lines, and they'd go sit on shore and watch their bobber, by a big campfire. And then when their bobber would go under or it would take off moving around, then they'd get in the boat, go out, wait a half an hour, and then release fish in. And from DNR research that we actually did in some of our hatchery ponds, we found out that about 80% of those fish died. They didn't die right away. Almost all of them would swim away, and most time vigorously swim away. But within a year, all those fish died, and when they were examined, they died because their stomach lining got ripped, their esophagus was ripped, and they ended up getting an infection and dying. The ones where the sucker and hook were still in the stomach, common thought was that those hooks would just rust and decay. Those 10-aught Super 4X hooks did not decay. Nor did the wire leader that was most times associated with those, and therefore led to the death of the fish. So we enacted a rule that any live bait over 8 inches needs to have a quick strike rig, and the hook was to be set immediately upon indication of a bite. That was huge. It saved a ton of fish, and I think that we're starting to see the benefits of that. I mean, I guess probably 3, 4, 5 years ago we started to see it, and it's just going to get better because these large fish who were caught in the fall on single hooks, they were all dead. We just didn't know it. They were dead fish swimming. They didn't get to reproduce the next year. They didn't get to be caught by anybody else. They just ended up on the bottom of the lake. So,
very interesting. I, again, didn't know the history there. I honestly didn't even fish with a quick strike rig until about 4 years ago. Now, granted, part of that is because I'm a fly angler, and I just don't carry around live bait,
Yeah, that gear is like a curse in the boat, right? You don't want to have those big bait casters in there.
No, not at all. I don't look at it that way. It's just there's I've got my fly angling gear, and then I've got my geared gear, and it's hard to bring both with. And then you throw live bait in a drift boat or a raft and stuff like that, man. And it's just, I don't have a 21-foot skeeter or anything like that to, bring my thousands of dollars worth of fishing equipment with me. I have to go through everything just about before every trip to make sure I got just what we need. I don't have too much extra. So, but we started, fishing them the last couple of years, and, I wouldn't even have thought to kind of pursue him that way. And, I'm not the type of person to just get, hey, we got a bite over there. We're going to wait, 20 minutes, half an hour. Like, I don't know. To me, that just seems a little foreign, but, I can definitely see how letting those fish hammer that bait like that and get, fully engulfed in their stomach and then try to reel them in. I can see how that leads to a whole bunch of harm. Did you guys see a significant bump in your data or research after you enacted that quick strike rig rule?
Well, with anything muskies, you don't see anything immediately, right? So
Sure.
if it was enacted in 2012, that was the first year that, this, fall killing of these fish theoretically stopped, even though people still did it and got pinched for it. But you probably wouldn't see that benefit until several years later. And what it's an individual lake thing too. Like certain lakes have a lot more of this, had a lot more of this situation occurring. Places like the Chippewa flowage had a lot of it, a lot of shoreline anglers with single hook rigs, and they don't have that anymore. And what we are seeing is on individual waters, we're seeing the average size and the largest fish we capture increase over time. The really cool thing, and for those of your listeners who are members of an organization like Muskie's Inc., Muskie's Inc. has a cool database that they provide to their members that you can like search. And the neat thing about the Muskie's Inc. data, and I didn't think this was the case before I started this investigation, but I looked at our DNR data. So say I have a lake XYZ and I have a bunch of muskie data from that lake that was obtained by DNR biologists. So I consider those very accurate, true measurements. And my perception was that anglers lie. And so therefore I thought that if I went to that same XYZ lake in the Muskie's Inc. database and downloaded their data and compared them, I would see something different. But that's not the reality. What the Muskie's Inc. folks register is almost identical to what we capture. So that does a couple things. It tells me that those anglers probably weren't lying, and I owe them an apology, and that our sampling gear does a pretty good job of capturing what's in the lake for the most part. I will say that our gear is somewhat limited to capturing the largest individuals because of the size of our gear. Like if we could work with larger nets, we probably would catch more really big fish, because what happens is they run into our mesh and they don't like to go into the nets. But we do a good job of sampling the population as a whole, as does angling, it turns out.
Well, I would assume, I mean, anglers, we're all, I guess, notorious for our fishtails. But I would assume very similar to hunting that, anglers produce some of the most relevant data that you guys get. And like hunting, license sales and then harvest information is a large driver in the numbers that the data or the DNR has for their data. I would assume it's the same for the fisheries, but you throw in that fishtail stuff and it might not necessarily shake out the same, but I'm very interested to hear that it did. Leading me to another question quickly about Muskie's Inc. So I think a lot of us hunters are very aware of all the different organizations that ask for our dollars every year for conservation. As a fisherman, there's a number of different associations as well. Is for muskie fishing, and specifically Wisconsin, is Muskie's Inc. kind of the tip of the pyramid? Are there other groups out there? Could you kind of enlighten us a little bit on the conservation aspect for these groups for muskies?
Sure. In Wisconsin, we have kind of a unique situation where we have both Muskies Inc. Quote unquote, this is an organization, Muskies Inc. I think it's, well, national, I guess. I don't think it's international because there aren't Muskies other places. So it's national. And then in Wisconsin, we also have the Muskie Clubs Alliance. And they're a very similar group. And a lot of times, Muskies Inc. members are also members of these local Muskie Clubs Alliance groups. They meet, separately. They have different, nonprofit organizations, but they both essentially do the same things, and they're a super valuable partner. Um, they routinely help us with research, providing money for research. They, provided a whole bunch of money for my graduate research, buying radio tags for putting in muskies. I'm eternally grateful for those things. They oftentimes, raise a lot of money for stocking fish, whether it's through their individual clubs and private aquaculture, or by funneling money to the department, and then we purchase minnows to feed muskies that get stocked into the resource. So they're valuable partners, and they essentially, work to do the same things, even though they're two kind of different organizations. And as far as that goes, those seem to be the two biggest, in my mind, the two biggest muskie related, I guess, conservation organizations that you would consider in the state.
Fair enough. Yeah. The reason I asked is I've usually tried to set aside some dollars every year for conservation efforts, both personal and professional. And I didn't spend any money on muskies last year, and I'm personally probably going to join Muskies Inc. this year. And was curious if there was any other organizations out there because, Trout Unlimited got my money last year, and so did every damn bird hunting cause out there. But this year I got to be a little bit more selective, and I spend enough time on these rivers chasing these fish that they need my money. So I also would encourage the listeners to consider joining one of these organizations that Jordan just laid out for us, because they truly do partner, much like, Rough Grouse Society, Pheasants Forever, Whitetails Unlimited. They work hand in hand with you guys to help just improve our fisheries and improve opportunities for a bunch of different people. And I think they're great organizations that we owe a lot to them. And especially if you're out there on the water chasing these fish.
Yeah, they're great partners. I mean, they've purchased for the department, electrofishing boats, which are, $50,000 to $60,000 boats, by pooling their money, and they're really a great partner in the resource. The bare minimum that a person can do, and to me, this isn't being a conservationist, but the bare minimum you do is buy a fishing license. That's the bare minimum, right? Being a part of a community. But to be, in my mind, to be a conservationist, and again, this is my definition, you need to do more than that. And I would even say it's even more than just, I'm a member of a group. I donated that membership fee. Again, I think that's just above bare minimum to do things like you're suggesting, to donate extra money towards different things, whether it's, equipment, whether or not it's research, whether it's stocking. Those things start to get you into the realm of being considered a conservationist. But, we alluded to it before. To be a true conservationist, you don't participate in the internet shaming. You go out and maybe take a new person fishing. You actually go out and maybe try to improve some habitat, or you reach out to people who work in the DNR or in conservation organizations and ask, how can I help? Because I think most people want to call themselves a conservationist by just buying a fishing or hunting license, but to me that doesn't even scratch the surface of what a true conservationist is.
Well, I don't think the people who set aside all this land, I mean, the folks who were laying the groundwork for the National Scenic Riverway Act up on the St. Croix, they weren't just buying a license, man.
No, they were doing what I described as conservation work.
You're damn right.
Putting in their personal time, their personal funds, their sweat, their equity, their efforts to do those. And those are the conservationists. Like, not everybody has to be a conservationist. right?
Well, and not everybody wants to be.
Right.
But those of you who want to or want to carry the hat around and say you are, these are the things you should be doing to stake that claim.
Yeah, I think so. That's just my definition, right? Like I said before, man, I don't care if you buy a license and want to call yourself a conservationist. I just don't think you are. You can call yourself whatever you want. Like, I'm not going to argue with anybody about it, but it just seems like it's easy to do some of these things. It doesn't take that much extra time, and if you really care about it, it's easy to do. And there's plenty of opportunities.
I think we can sum this up with a really quick phrase. My old man used to tell me all the time, money talks and bullshit walks. So, I mean, whether or not that's finances out of your pocket or a little blood, sweat, and tear on your brow, I mean, it comes down to the work's got to get done, and the resources are somewhat limited on manpower or technology, and you can only go so far. So if you're willing to help, you're going to help take the whole thing a little further.
Right. Yeah, and that's, that goes into the whole, money is really the limiting factor in terms of muskie production in the state of Wisconsin. Many of our waters are stocked, and stocking fish costs a lot of money. And my salary is paid by license sales, and much of what the DNR does comes out of license sales and federal extra taxes on sporting equipment. And our license fee in Wisconsin hasn't gone up in 15 years or something.
I thank you so much for that, because I currently live across the river in Wisconsin and I have to pay an out-of-state fee. So I will for another year or two. So
that's even a bargain. We give our resources away in Wisconsin. I mean,
you do.
Come here and shoot a deer for $160 and
172.
Try to go to Illinois.
Think. Yeah, or hell, try to go out to Colorado, where your success rate is like sub 20%, and pay $800 for an elk tag.
Yeah, that's a whole different discussion, and I'm not. But I mean, I'm just a layperson in that stuff. But
same here. But I mean, $800 for an elk tag, or you can harvest 3 whitetail, which kind of comes out to about probably damn close to the same in meat, for a fraction of the cost. So, and you get 3 times the amount of fun.
Yeah, I don't have a lot of patience for anglers that complain about spending $20, or I don't know what it is, $24. I always get a patron's license, so I really have no idea what these licenses cost individually.
I know, I do.
$20 for a fishing license, or at most $24 for a fishing license. They complain about something that they can use for 365 days and get sustenance for your family most of those days out there. And they complain for the price of a movie ticket and a bag of popcorn.
Oh, shit, man. That's probably the price of the damn musky bait they're freaking casting.
But every time we approach, or suggest, hey, it'd be nice to get a increase in license fees so we have a little more operating budget, because as everybody knows, if you know anything about business or inflation, that nothing costs the same now as it did 15 years ago. And we're still operating on those budgets from 15 years ago, trying to do the same amount of work right now.
Hell, man, I just redid my family budget at the beginning of the month, because nothing cost the same as it did in December last year.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, 15 years. That's when the last time you guys are still kind of operating on the same budget?
Ish. It's really close to that. Yeah. I don't know the date for sure.
This is just conversation, but that's kind of crazy.
But it's been a lot. It's been over 10 for sure. And I won't be surprised if it's over 15 if I went back and looked at it, which, I mean, I don't have anything directly to do with it, so I don't pay that much attention to that. That would have to come from the legislature, but it doesn't seem like they're just like, oh, just continue to do more with less. Oh, okay.
Well, and I think everybody's feeling that squeeze, man. And I think, if there's anything that individuals can do, it's join these groups.
Yep.
You can't pay more for your license. The DNR is probably not, they'll probably take the money, but it's probably not going to go to muskies directly.
Well, so you can. There is a venue for that. And
really?
Remiss, and I am remiss not to mention it. So, we mentioned a little bit we mentioned it a little bit at the beginning. So I'm the leader of the statewide muskie team, with a co-leader, Zach Lawson from Northern Wisconsin, and then also team sponsor Tim Simonson, who works out of Madison. But we have what's called a gift account. So I run the Muskie team gift account, and it's an account that the DNR holds that takes donations we take them from clubs, we take them from individuals, and it goes into an account that we then can use to do muskie related items. And what we can do with that money kind of depends on who gives it and what they ask us to do. So say if Brian Mays wanted to donate $1,000 to the Muskie team gift account, but Brian only wanted that to go towards Muskie stocking. I say thank you very much. Please write the check out to the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources. Send it to me. I will submit it to the Muskie team gift account. You will get a letter of receipt from, I think, the secretary. I'm not 100% sure because I don't write those, but you'll get a receipt. And then when I budget that money, say to the Governor Thompson Hatchery to grow muskies, I will then say, hey, I told them they could use $1,000 out of this account with this budget string, so that goes to, to that hatchery to buy minnows. Let's just say hypothetically.
Well, that's really kick-ass, man. I mean, I had no idea.
So you don't have to be like, you don't have to go through a Muskies club if you don't want to. You can contact an individual biologist. Say you have a cabin on the Chippewa. You call Max Walter and you say, hey, Max, I want to donate money to work on the Chippewa. And maybe you don't even care if it's about muskies. Max has access to these gift accounts as well. We have 100 different ones in the state. And many of our 40 biologists have an individual gift account that they can work on their resources with. So they're smaller accounts, generally smaller amounts of money, generally. Some of them get big, sometimes we get an estate to donate a bunch of money to do a certain thing,
Sure.
Most often,
Well, and that's why I was kind of asking some of this stuff. And when you kind of got into it and I said, well, that's really cool because, there's a legacy component to some of this stuff. I'm all around, you go to certain landings, they're donated by a family. You go to a certain wildlife management areas and, it was a family farm, and that legacy of the individual, the heir of that farm, they wanted to donate it to the state for whatever the cause was. So I think that's really, really unique and cool. If somebody has a huge passion for whatever it is, muskies or prairie chicken or, whitetails, that people can actually leave that kind of legacy component. And with the help of the DNR, you guys are well equipped to be able to do that.
Yeah, I'm not sure if that's the same with wildlife, so don't quote me on that one. But with fisheries, I'm positive how that works.
Well, I know how it
I deal
works.
with it all the time.
I've had, folks on from Pheasants Forever and stuff like that. So I know that, land and things along those lines can be gifted through the state, through different programs. And I'm sure it's different for every county and municipality and everybody who's got their hands on that ink to dry on the contract. But just knowing that you guys specifically have one of these accounts, so that if there is another nut out there who, wants to do some estate planning and leave some money for muskies in the state of Wisconsin after they're gone, they can do it. That's just cool. It's really cool.
Yeah, and the two areas in fisheries that we need the most assistance with are stocking and research. Most people are really surprised at what a research project costs. Some of it's associated with universities, but that it gets tied up into benefits and whatnot, fringe, I guess. But just to have a grad student at Stevens Point or any other university work on a muskie project, you kind of start at $100,000 and go from there.
Really?
So it's really expensive to do, but it's really important as well. So that's something that the Muskie team tries to juggle all the time is, we try to maximize production at our hatchery system. And we also try to get as much research done as we can, because I can guarantee you that despite what some people think about DNR staff, every single person I work with only does it because they want to make fishing better for people. And speaking for wildlife, they only do it to make hunting better.
I know that for a fact too.
None of them are going to put up with crap from the public and generally low salary because they, don't care. So, we all do it because we want to make things better. And
you don't take a job working at the DNR because you're going to get rich. Just the bottom line. You will have a rich life. It's just not going to come in the form of the state paying you a ton of money.
Right. I always say that it's the difference between having to go to work and getting to go to work.
Exactly.
So I get to go to work every day,
Yep.
And if I'm really having a bad day, I go a step away from this computer that I'm sitting in front of right now and I go squeeze a couple fish. You know why? because they never talk back to me.
It's funny you say that. When I left the corporate world, one of the big things I kept saying was, I'm done dealing with all these corporate lackeys. Trees and animals are a hell of a lot nicer than people.
I think, when they start talking back to me, I'm going to have to hang it up. But yeah, I agree with you.
Well, speaking of hanging it up, man, I know you've got a time commitment here, and I do want to talk to you quickly after we get done with the show here today for just a quick moment.
Sure.
Is there anything you'd like to say in closing, or anything that we kind of started touching on that you felt we didn't fully wrap up on?
No, not necessarily, other than, if anybody has questions about any of the things that I've said about DNR fisheries, you can get a hold of me. You can Google my name, Wisconsin DNR, or you can email me at jordan.weeks@wisconsin.gov, G-O-V. Email me, give me a call. I'm not hard to find if you know how to use the Google machine. I'd be happy to chat with you about muskies, or chat with you about policy, or get you some answers that you need. I work for anglers of the state. Like I said before, I get paid by fishing license sales. I do not get paid by tax revenue. It's all fishing license sales. So if fishing sucks and y'all don't buy licenses, then I don't have a job. And so far, I think I'm doing a fairly decent job. So I'm here to help you if you need. Let me know.
Yeah, I would confer with that, because you are 3 or 4 so far this year from the Wisconsin DNR we've had on the program, and every one of them, every one of you folks have all said, get in touch with us, and we don't hear enough from the public, and that we'd love to hear more, because it's just the engagement is paramount at creating and maintaining a great environment for all of us anglers. So I encourage everybody, if you got something you want to talk to Jordan or anything about muskies, reach out, please. So I think we can wrap things up. Last question for you, Jordan.
Sure.
Would you be willing to come back and talk about tiger muskies?
Yeah, I can. I will have to warn you that, a lot of research on tiger muskies has been done in a laboratory experiment. They generally aren't studied very much. And so they're, in my mind, versus regular muskie management, there's not a ton to talk about, but I'm more than happy to come on and talk with you at any time.
I think, there's other things we could talk about, but I'm just interested in understanding, the history and things, and, just their introduction into the system, because they're definitely a different animal than our classic muskellunge here of the rivers. So
half pike, for sure they are. Yep.
Yeah, and there's the whole pike muskie dynamic too that we could talk about that I think is a very interesting, at least fisherman topic. So
yeah, that's much more interesting.
Yeah. So anyways, I really appreciate you coming on the show, man, and it was a good conversation today, and I appreciate the education on a few things.
Well, thank you very much for the opportunity.
You're welcome. We'll have you back on soon. Thank you for sticking in to the end of episode 47. Check out Patreon. I promise you, there's goodies there. There's more to come, and it's cheap. It's $5. If you're looking to book a fly fishing trip with me this year, get in touch with me. Email me at brian@amazon.com. If you are a muskie guy and you are not part of Muskies Inc., you really should consider joining. I am sending my dues in for the first time to the Twin Cities chapter this month in April. I'm a new member. It's never too late. Spring has arrived. Get out there. The fish are getting ready to spawn. The turkeys are gobbling. The woodcock are back. The trout are rising. Man, I love this time of year. When you go, bring someone along. You will not regret introducing somebody new to your passions. No BS, I mean it. All right, folks, tight lines and shoot straight. I hear the dogs barking, and I think there's a stream calling my name. I'm gonna get out of here.